everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video we will be sewing our last top part of the top series part 1, which is the pre-spring top. So the last top that we are sewing would be Simplicity 8550 View C, which is our tie front top. So it's this pattern right here. I will be doing View C in this video, so let's go ahead and get into the tools and the pattern pieces you will need in order to construct this top. Okay, so let's talk about the supplies you will need in order to construct this tie front top. So the first thing you will need is the pattern, which is Simplicity 8550. Like I said, we will be doing View C. You will also need a pair of scissors. Now, I do not cut with scissors. I only use the scissors to cut fabric or thread, but I also use thread scissors at the sewing machine, which is little clippers that I use. I also cut my fabric with a rotary cutter. So I use one for paper, one for fabric. I never mix the two on those. I also have elastic. So I have 3/4 inch non-roll elastic, as well as 1 inch roll of non-roll elastic as well. I have a seam ripper just in case I make a mistake and I need to rip out my seams. I have a white chalk. I have a disappearing marker. I have a point turner to poke out any of my sharp points, or if I'm using something to turn, I have a point turner for that. I have pins. I have a safety pin for my elastic for the sleeves. And I also have 7 buttons. You will need 7 buttons. Now you can use a 1/2 inch buttons, or you can use 5/8 inch, whichever one you decide. That's completely up to you. That's a personal preference. So let's go ahead and get to the back of the pattern so I could definitely show you the items you will need and what size I will be cutting. All right, so let's talk about the fabrics that you can use in order to construct this tie front top. You can use a challis, a chambray, a cotton type, a crepe, a double georgette. You can use gingham, you can use plaid, you can use linen, you can use pretty much all sorts of fabric, shirting fabric as well. If you plan on doing this in stripes or plaid, just make sure that you get extra fabric to accommodate. So let's go into the notions. Since I am doing View C, I will need 7 1/2 inch buttons, which I have those. I would need 1 inch wide elastic, 3/4 of a yard of that. I will also need 3/4 wide elastic, but I need 7/8 yard or 1 yard for that. Now for me, I'm gonna move all the way down to the body measurement. And now my bust is actually a 40. So if I'm just looking at the very top portion for bust 40, it tells me to cut a size 18. Now my waist is a 32, so the waist is still within that 18. My hips is a 44. So because my hips is a 44, it tells me a 20Y or 20W, 21 women. So that's if I look in that top portion, which is my body measurement. However, because I'm doing View C and I'm using 60 inch wide fabric, it tells me that if I'm doing a size 18, I need to purchase a total of 2 1/8 yard. Now, one thing that I do is I always buy a 1/2 yard extra. So since I do not want to purchase like 2 3/4, I would just go ahead and purchase 3 yards of fabric, but I went ahead and purchased 3 1/2 yards to give me more than enough fabric of what I would need in order to construct this top. Moving down to the finished garment measurement. So since I said that my bust is a 40, to account for ease, I need at least a 43. So therefore, I am going to go to the 44 to give me more than enough room. So when I look at the bust and go over to 44, it tells me that I need to cut a size 16. So for me, I will be cutting a size 16 in order to construct a View C, which is the tunic, or what I am calling the tie front top. However, I do want to note that I will be doing View C, but my length will be View A because I do want it kind of like a dress if I decide to make it as a dress. Now, the last thing that's in this pattern piece is the finished back length from base of neck. So if you look at the base of your neck, and you feel that bone right where your collar of your shirt is. If you measure from there down to 36 3/4 inches, because my length is view A, I need to measure the 36 3/4 inches. So therefore, I will measure and see how long that top will be. If I need to make any adjustments or I do not want it that long, I will accommodate for how long I want it. If you are doing view C with no modifications, your length will be 28 3/4 if you're cutting the size 16. Now that I have talked about the back part of the pattern and what size I will be cutting, let's go ahead and get into the pattern pieces. Okay, so the first pattern piece that you will need is pattern piece number 15, which is the tie in. You will need to cut 2 of fabric. You'll need pattern piece number 16, which is the sleeve if you're doing view C or D, and you need to cut 2 of fabric. The next pattern piece you will need is pattern piece number 1, which is your front for all views A, B, C, and D. You need to cut 2. Now, one thing I want to say is because I'm doing a size 16 for my bust, I cut cut the size 16 for the 44, and then I grade it to my waist and then further down to my hips. So you could do all your adjustments on the pattern, or you could do it on regular paper. But once again, this is pattern piece number 1. This is the front. You need to cut 2. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 2, which is your back for all views A, B, C, and D. You need to cut 1 on the fold of the fabric. Next pattern piece you will need is pattern piece number 7, which is your front facing for all views, and you need to cut 2 of fabric and interface 2. The next pattern piece that you need is pattern piece number 8, which is your back facing for all views. You need to cut 1 on the fold of fabric and 1 on the fold of interfacing. Next pattern piece that you will need is pattern piece number 17, which is your sleeve facing for view C and D. You need to cut 2 of fabric. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 18, which is the elastic for your arms. So for your sleeve, the sleeve arms, this is the elastic for that, and you need to cut 2. Also, if you're doing view A, B, C, and D, you will also need pattern piece number 10, which is the sleeve elastic, and you need to cut 2. So one mistake that I just made is for pattern piece number 18, which I said was the arm. This is the arm elastic guide, and you need to cut 2. Pattern piece number 10 is the sleeve elastic guide, and you need to cut 2 of those as well. So just a quick correction that I wanted to make. And the last pattern piece that you will need is if you're doing view C like I am, you will need pattern piece number 19, which is your buttonhole. And this you do not cut out of fabric. It's once you sew your tie front shirt together, then you'll go ahead and make your button placement and make your buttonholes. However, I will not be using pattern piece number 19 for mine because my length is view A. I will be using pattern piece number 11 and make my buttonholes according to pattern piece number 11, which is view A, because then it'll make it the length of my entire top. So those are all the pieces that you need to construct this top. So let's go ahead and get right on into the sewing. All right, so let's go ahead and get started sewing our tie front top. So the first thing you want to do is grab pattern piece number 1. So this is the front. And what you're going to do is go ahead and make your darts. Now I have done darts so many times in all of the videos that I have done in this tutorial. So I'm going to show you one time on how to do the dart. So I'm going to pin at this dot, check and see if it's coming out on the other side, and pin. So I'm going to go ahead and make the darts right here. Do it on both sides. So basically you're going to back stitch at the beginning and do not back stitch at the end. Just pull your threads and tie like twice. So go ahead and make your darts. Okay, so now that I have made my darts in the front pattern pieces on both of my pattern pieces for my front, if you have not done this already, go ahead and cut your interfacing. Now my interfacing is 1 inch. So 1 inch wide interfacing. So what you're going to do is you're going to fold along that interfacing and press, and then you're going to hand base. Now me, I'm just going to base all the way down and stop about 5 inches from the bottom. Once you do that, you're going to fold in a second time right there, and then you're going to baste again. So the first time, what you're going to do is you're going to, once again, fold in the interfacing and press. Making sure you hand baste if you would like. However, I'm going to take my stitching out, so I'm going to do it on my machine. Once you hand baste that portion, you're going to fold again, press, and then you're going to baste again, and make sure that you leave about 5 inches from the bottom. So I would measure up 5 inches from the bottom before you start basting. Go ahead and do that. All right, so now that I have folded the inside once where the interfacing was, pressed it, based, I folded in a second time, pressed, and then based close to the edge. Now both of these are 1 inch, so you would put interfacing on the edge, press 1 inch in, fold, base, and then press another inch in, fold, and base close to this second stitching. Now that you have done your front, go ahead and put your front to the side and grab your tie ends, which is pattern piece number 15. So with right sides together, you should have 2 ties. So with right sides together, you're going to fold in half and pin. And using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to back stitch at the beginning, go all the way down the length, and then come across. Using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning, and at the end, you want to leave the end where the dot is open. All right, so now that I have sewn my tie belt, left my ends with the dot open. So what you want to do is go ahead and turn it right side out. And make sure you poke out all of your corners. So just turn it right side out. So I'm going to go in with my point turner. And being very careful because I am using a linen. I do not want to puncture any holes. I'm just going to do it really softly and make sure that I am poking out my corners. And then what you want to do is go ahead and give this a good press, and then you want to base across. Base across the edge that has the dot. Now that I have based the ends of both ties, you want to go ahead and grab your front pattern pieces and turn them right sides up. So what you want to do is take one tie, and matching up that dot, you want to pin, making sure that the edges are even. So match up that dot and pin. And you're going to do this to the other front the same way. So what you're going to do is baste the ties onto your front, backstitch at the beginning, and you do not have to actually backstitch, but I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and at the end to secure that with the basting stitch. All right, so now that I have basted my ties onto the front, I want to say one thing. Now, this is my personal preference is that the dot should be at the bottom. So you could flip it and have your ties closer to the top, but I want mine closer to the bottom around my waist. I don't want it too far up towards the bodice portion. So that's why I did mine this way versus flipping it over and having the dot at the bottom and this portion towards the top near this notch right here. So that's just a personal preference. You could do it the way that the instruction says, but this is just my personal preference that I want to do. Now that I have mentioned that, go ahead and put the front to the side for a second and grab your back pattern piece, which is pattern piece number 2. Now with right sides together, you're going to pin front to back at side seams. So I'm going to turn it this way because mine is pretty long. And with right sides together, making sure that I have the right side. And make sure that your ties is concealed to the front. All right, so what I'm gonna do is pin at the side seams. Make sure you are matching up your notches at the side seam as well. And once you match up your notch, go ahead and pin. Now using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and at the end. And then you want to serge your seams. All right, so on the sleeve, with the first thing I'm going to do, you do not have to do this. This is also a personal preference. I'm going to go ahead and do my hem first, and that's at 5/8 of an inch hem allowance. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and create my hem, and then with right sides together, I'm going to go ahead and pin at that notch, and then pin the length of my sleeves, and then stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then go ahead and serge the side seams. All right, so now I am done sewing my sleeve together. I also mark the casing line. So what I did was I hemmed the bottom. Then with right sides together, I sewn the seam using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end. And then I went ahead and finished off my seams and pressed my seams towards the back. How I know it's the back, it's because it has 2 notches. That signifies the back of your sleeve. So make sure that you press the seams towards the back of your sleeves. So now the next thing you're gonna do is go ahead and if you have single fold bias tape, you could go ahead and use that, but I am making my own bias tape because I just did not want to pick up any bias tape. So what I'm gonna do is I have a video, which you could click right up at the top, where I made a face mask and created some bias tape then. So I'm going to do this quickly to show you exactly how I'm going to make my bias tape. So I'm making single fold bias tape instead of double fold bias tape. So what I did was I fold fabric in half, pressed it to create that 45-degree angle, 90-degree angle, I'm sorry. And then I completely cut the strips 1 7/8 of an inch long. Once I did that, I clipped off the end, and now I am going ahead to sew these two strips together. And I'm going to sew from this corner to this corner, back stitching at the beginning and at the end. All right, so now that I have went ahead and sewn that seam and trimmed it down, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this in half all the way down the length of the bias strip that I created. And then I'm going to open it and press both seams towards the center. This creates my single fold bias tape. All right, so now that I have created my single fold bias tape, go ahead and grab one of your sleeves. So what you're going to do is fold in one end of your single fold bias tape, and then you're going to place the end of that bias tape where your marking is right here. So my marking for my casing is right here, and you want to pin. You want to make sure that when you're pinning that you are not pinning through all layers. You're just pinning the top layer. And then you're going to pin all the way around. Now, one thing I want to mention is from this bottom edge, which is your hem, to your casing, it's 2 1/4 inch. So make sure that you can either measure that 2 1/4 inch and then pin to make sure that it's even all the way around. So go ahead and pin it all the way around. All right, so now that I have the bias tape that I created pinned all the way around the casing area for my sleeves, go ahead and sew as close to the edge as possible. So you're not going to sew this portion, you're going to sew the top portion all the way around and then the bottom all the way around. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so I went ahead and did my casing for my sleeve. So just put your sleeve aside for a quick second and grab pattern piece number 18, which is your arm elastic guide if you're doing view C. So I am doing side 16. So I'm going to measure from this side to 16, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut. So I'm going to measure one more time to make sure I am cutting at the 16. I'm going to cut 2 pieces. Make sure you do not cut your actual pattern when you do this. Now this is 3/4 inch wide elastic. So I'm going to measure one more time to make sure I did not cut it too small. And I did not. So then what I'm going to do is grab my safety pin and put it at the end of one of the elastic. Grab your sleeve. And then you're going to feed it through your sleeve. All right, so now that I have my casing done, my elastic in, what you want to do is turn it right side out. And you could try it on to make sure that it's not too tight around this portion of your wrist or arm. All right, so what you want to do is go ahead and grab your top, and you're going to pin the sleeve to your top. Now, one thing I do want to mention is make sure you have the correct sleeve. So you have one notch here and 2 notches here. So what you want to do is pin at the underarm seam. Now, this is the wrong side because there's 2 notches there and 1 notch over here. So this does not go to that side. So you want to go to the other side where you have 2 notches here and 1 notch there. And then you want to pin. So making sure that the underarm seams match up and your seams are facing towards the back of your top, you want to pin. Match them up, match the seams up and pin. Match the notches up and pin as well. Now using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and sew your sleeve section. So backstitch at the beginning and backstitch at the end, and then serge your seams. All right, so now that I have sewn my sleeve onto my bodice right here and serge the seams, so what I need you to do is go ahead and put the top aside and grab your facing piece. So you need pattern piece number 8. So make sure you grab pattern piece number 8, number 7, and 17. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do is open up pattern piece number 8, which is your back facing. And then what you want to do is, with right sides together, you want to attach pattern piece number 17, which is your sleeve facing, to one side of your back facing. There. Now, I don't want to go back and forth to my sewing machine so many times. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and open up, this is the right side of 17. So what I'm going to do is, with right sides together, attach pattern piece number 7, which is my front facing, to pattern piece number 17. Now, don't forget, this is pattern piece number 17. So right sides together, you're going to pin. There's a notch there, so make sure you are pinning at that notch. All right, so using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're gonna sew each seam. So you're gonna sew this seam, the seam between your back pattern piece and your sleeve facings, as well as the sleeve facing and the front piece as well. So sew all 4 seams that you have pinned right sides together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and at the end. All right, so now that I have sewn my facing pieces together, what you want to do is go ahead and serge. You can finish off however you like. Serge the non-unnotched edge of your facing. So basically you should have notches at the very top. You don't want to serge that edge. You want to serge this bottom edge right here. Or what you can do is you could turn it in 1/4 of an inch, press it, and then turn it in. Press to that 1/4 of an inch and then press up again to encase it. But I'm just going to serge mine and finish it off. Now that I have finished off the unnotched edge of my facing, go ahead and grab your top. And this is the back facing up. And with right sides together, you should see 2 notches, which is the back of your facing. So what you want to do is pin at those notches. Pin at both of those notches. And then pin at your shoulder seams, or your sleeve seams actually. You want to pin there. Make sure that they match up. And then you want to pin the other sleeve as well. Other seams as well. And then you have a dot. You want to make sure that you are matching that dot with this dot. And then you're going to do this the other side the exact same way. right, so now that I have sewn my facing onto my top, what you want to do is go ahead and trim that seam down to about 3/8 or a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. Now that I have my facing trimmed down, what I'm going to do next is go ahead and turn the placket area onto itself. So you're just going to turn it to the inside, and then I want you to go ahead and pin. And what you're going to do is go to your sewing machine and using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're just going to stitch right here. And you do not want to go past this facing portion. So you just want to stitch down right here, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Okay, so now that I have completely finished my facing, you want to make sure that you pressed your facing up, your seam towards the facing once you trimmed it down. And what you're going to do is understitch. So make sure you backstitch at the beginning and at the end and understitch. On the facing, not on the garment. All right, so now that I have understitched my facing, what you're going to do is go ahead and press it to the inside. Once you press it into the inside, where your sleeve is, you're going to prepare it for the casing if you're doing view C like I am. So what you're going to do is basically stitch along that seam line. Right here where you're stitching this, you're going to stitch along that seam line as close as possible. You just want to stitch from this seam to this seam over here, just to create that casing. So once you press your facing to the inside, make sure you stitch right along this seam line, this edge right here between both seams of both sleeves. All right, so now that I have pressed my facing down, I went ahead and add my label at the very back of my top / dress because mine is long enough to rock it as a top or as a dress because my length is view A, although my top is view C, like I started off telling you guys. So I want to show you the areas that I pinned. So right here, it's pinned where the facing, so you got to make sure that your facing is underneath your placket area. So make sure that your facing is underneath. You're going to pin right there. And then you're going to pin from seam to seam where your elastic is going to go for your sleeve. So basically elastic is going to go right here. So you're going to sew from seam to seam as close to the edge as possible there. You're going to do it on both seams as well. And then I have this area pinned as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch from the top all the way down where it told you to stop basting 5 inches from the top down, 5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out using a normal length stitch, and I'm going to stitch that 5-inch down from top to here to connect the stitching on both sides. And then I'm going to go ahead and stitch where my sleeves are and then insert the elastic. Now make sure, I believe according to the instructions, you are using 1-inch elastic. So make sure you insert your elastic through, and then you're going to go ahead and pin your elastic and sew stitching in the ditch. So you're going to stitch right in the ditch to secure your elastic. All right, so now that I have my elastic in at my sleeve area, One thing I want to mention that I did, this is a personal preference. I did not want my facing to be flopping around everywhere when wearing it. So I created a stitching line right after I put my casing in and attached the elastic right here in the ditch. I went ahead and created a stitching line all the way around, and that's just to keep my facing from flopping up when wearing it. But this is a personal preference. You do not have to do that. It's not going to bug me. It's not going to bother me whatsoever. So the only thing you have left to do is go ahead and do your hem. I already did my hem. All you're going to do is press up 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, press to that line, and then turn it over, press again, and stitch on the right side of your hem. Make sure that this portion right here is also facing on the inside. After you do that, go ahead and make your buttonholes and put on your buttons. Now, please note that your buttonholes will be made on the right side when wearing it. So you want to make your buttonholes on this side and then attach your buttons on this side. Now, because I am doing view A, I will be using the button guide from pattern piece number, I believe this is 11. If you're doing view C, you will be using the buttonhole guide from pattern piece number 19. Now, it does have a portion where it says top. So you want to match that up with the top of your garment and make your buttonholes all the way down. So that's what I will be doing. And then I will be using my machine and making buttonholes on the other side. Once you're done with your buttons, go ahead and give it a nice, lovely wash, press, and then go ahead and style, and let's see you rock this tie front top. Well, there we have it. We have just finished sewing our last top part of the pre-spring top, which is our tie front top. So we have sewn 5 tops in this pre-spring top series. So we have sewn, just to recap, we have sewn a blousing top, the bralette top, the Bardot top, or the Bardot, whichever one that you want to call it, the Bardot top, the wrap top, and our tie front top. So we will move into the spring season. The new video will be coming up shortly. So like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, keep sewing.